Good evening. Welcome to the program. My name is Chris Smith. This is Cop2Cop. It is true crime in real time. Tonight we analyse the national crimes of the week with the assistance of true, current and retired operators in this most amazing sphere. I want to welcome you to our guest panel, and I want to start with Tim Priest. Tim is a former New South Wales Police Detective Sergeant, serving in Cabramatta and focusing on drug dealing and gang crime. He was the chairman of John Howard's Crime Advisory Board under the Prime Minister. Tim has also written a number of best-selling books, including 2003's Enemies of the State. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris.
I want to introduce you to a man who, at the age of 36, was convicted and sentenced for the supply of a commercial quantity of cocaine. Richard Buttrose served nearly a decade in jail at some of the toughest prisons in Australia. But while there, he certainly made the most of it. He enrolled in university and earned a Bachelor of Business and an MBA in Finance. He has successfully sued the Attorney-General, which created a case law precedent for the application of the Sentencing Procedure Act, and he will soon graduate, would you believe, with a Bachelor of Laws. Richard Buttrose, welcome to the program for you.
Good to be here, Chris.
I want to introduce you to Vinnie Caribs. Vinnie has had a diverse career in the New South Wales Police Force. He's been there for over 30 years, investigating street crime. He was also involved in undercover operations. He gathered and analysed criminal intelligence. He's been on bail duty and leading teams in community policing. He is an all-rounder who has seen absolutely everything. Vinnie, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Chris.
And our fourth guest is a criminal defender. He is a lawyer who, in his 48-year career, has worked on the Milperra Father's Day shootings in 1984. John Hadji has represented some of the most significant criminals, including Billy Bayer and, more recently, hitman Ab Sultani. He's defended for organised crime gangs, murderers, drug importers. John has represented defendants of all types of crime. John Hadji, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Chris.
Cop2Cop is true crime in real time. Tonight we will be analysing three of the biggest crimes across this country in recent days. Our panel of crime experts will unpack the whys and also the wherefores and make some predictions about what's ahead. And our audience too will be very much part of our conversation. We have individuals here who can add to what we're discussing in terms of the pivotal points in reducing crime and trying to come up with laws that work more effectively. Our first crime involves the prolific investigation of domestic violence in this country. As a matter of fact, we have at this stage in 2024 seeing one person dying, one woman dying every 4 days in the country. It was 1 in 10 in 2023. Statistics like these have not been seen in this country since records were kept. I want to take you to the first crime, that is the domestic violence incident in Perth, Western Australia. A 35-year-old man charged with murder after assaulting his partner, the mother of 4 children. He then set that house alight. I want to talk to our panel and start with Tim Priest, if I may. Tim, this is a 35-year-old man who's now what looks like to be charged seriously with killing this woman. In your day, the cohort, the age group, was much older. I'm getting the sense that we're seeing a much younger culprit involved in domestic violence. Is it true, and why is that?
Look, it is a phenomenon. In the days that Vinnie and I policed, the average age was 45 to 55. He was an unskilled worker. Alcohol was nearly always a factor. Now we're seeing young men 20, 21, 23. I don't see alcohol being a factor in some of these. I can only put it down to that what you're seeing with young people now is a generation that has grown up on the internet. And their minds have been influenced by some of the crap that is available for them to see on the internet. And coupled with the fact that authority has broken down, whether it's a school, whether it's a church, whether it's the police. These young people don't have role models. And if you don't have a role model, you've got nothing to set your moral compass by. And one of the things their moral compass is failing is just genuine respect for women.
Richard Buttrose, you have watched the Prime Minister in the last 5 days, as we all have, say, I've got the answer, $925 million so that we have a leave payment for women. Now, it takes us about 5 years to hand out a payment to our veterans. I don't know how long it's going to take to try and save a woman who says, I want a leave payment very quickly. How do you determine the amount? Is that the answer? Because I just see many more cases and less people being able to handle those cases and nowhere for them to live.
I don't think it is the answer, and centralised solutions are never working. We've seen this week in Newcastle, a community-based charity set up a place for women to go, and at the moment there is nowhere for these women to go. They're vulnerable, they're stuck, they're financially beholden to in these situations. And this charity organisation in Newcastle has set up a place for women to go in a car park, and there's shower facilities, there's coffee facilities, and there's a safe place for them to go.
Has that been given support by politicians?
No,
by
not
government?
at all. Not at all. The best the government could do is come out and criticise it. And Rose Jackson, who is presiding over a multi-billion-dollar budget, said, and I quote, "It's a shame it's come to this."
That's ridiculous.
So she's got no solution. The community is helping women that are vulnerable in their own community, and the Prime Minister wants to throw billions of dollars for a centralised solution from Canberra. It's not going to work.
The Prime Minister also said, Vinny, that we've got to change the culture in this country. Easier said than done.
Oh my God. I mean, at the end of the day, the last thing I want to see is families removed from their home and going to some refuge. You want to fix the problem? Get rid of the problem. The problem is the offender. He needs to go. He needs to go somewhere where people are going to feel safe.
You mean you've got to lock him up?
What do you think?
At the first instance of accusation, though?
The trouble, there's the point. That's the point.
OK, let's talk to John Hadji about that. The problem is, John, that in many instances, and we've heard this in many court cases, that bail laws and AVOs can be weaponised by women who have a beef with their partner.
Absolutely, Chris. Look, this is not a blame game. It's horrible what's happening out there. It's not excusable. The answers are kind of D, all of the above. There's no one fixed solution for what's going on. You can talk about breakdown of society. You can talk about all that stuff. You can talk about lack of respect. It's not that simple. And sure, it starts with money, because money has to be spent to provide things like refuges, and these are all required. Knee-jerk reaction on bail laws are not the answer. You've got to look at the offender first. You certainly don't forget about the victim. The victim's needs are a priority. But let's look at the offender and the offender's state of mind, because that's where it starts.
Tim Priest, John, can I interrupt there? Just right on that point you make. Tim Priest, the opposition in New South Wales has suggested putting monitoring bracelets on those who are accused of serious, indictable offences related to domestic violence. Will that work?
Look, that will work, and what we've got to do immediately, if 1 in 4, one woman's being killed every 4 days, we have to put a fence around this and stop the statistics going on and another 4 women die in another 10 days. So we put a fence around it. One way you do that certainly is ankle bracelets. Another way you do that is having strict bail conditions. And I'm all in favour of these domestic violence offenders being put on some sort of home detention where they cannot leave their home. If you're not going to bail...
OK, but Tim, just say, I've never had a crime accused of a crime. And all of a sudden someone makes that accusation, it's false, and do I have to then go...
Well, unfortunately, Chris, you're going to get caught up in mob justice.
OK, let me go to one of our audience members. This is really important. I want to go to Marco. Marco, you've got great experience in terms of bail laws being weaponised and therefore you being put inside when clearly it was not necessarily your fault. We'll try and get a microphone to Marco if we can, just on the front there. That's perfect. Thank you, Lexi. Marco, tell me, you've actually been chased down, put inside for a crime that you simply did not commit.
Yeah, I was accused of domestic violence close to a year ago. The police rocked up on my doorstep. Neighbours actually even told the police that she was the offender. The police didn't want to hear about it. I actually told the police that there's a CCTV camera in the foyer to show that I was actually the victim. Again, the police didn't want to hear about it. They practically put me in handcuffs, dragged me to a paddy wagon. Even on a bail application at the local court, we said to the judge, there's a camera and I was the victim.
Okay, let me ask you two questions. One, did the camera show eventually that you were not guilty?
Not only was I not guilty, her entire statement was a lie. She was shown to not only attack me, remove her own clothes, her statement was complete false.
Okay, is it true that because of your previous conviction and sentencing for drug crime, this played against you in the eyes of those who were arresting you?
Yes, but with my past, I've been out of prison for 7 years. I'm a legitimate business person now. After 7 years, I was never harassed by police. Now, having this domestic violence over me, I've constantly harassed by the police. They've put me on a curfew, even though the CTV showed I was innocent. I constantly get pulled over by the police. My whole life's been turned around.
Okay,
by a
Vince,
false
do we lock
allegation.
him up?
Listen, Chris, I am.
Do we
not
lock him up?
Well, I would have investigated it properly, and if
there's
the
no
evidence
there's
there,
no resources for that.
If the evidence he suggests was there and she attacked him, I would be locking her up.
But they're not doing that.
Okay.
This is the
well,
attitude.
if they're not doing
This-
it, then there's a problem.
Tim
This is
Priest,
what-
do we
this
lock
is-
him up?
This is where you get $925 million value. You fund police squads that handle domestic violence only. So what you got at the moment is you've got cops, general duties cops, that'll go to a prang, that'll go to a shoplifter, then they'll be called to a domestic. You can't be an expert in everything. So what you do is you get domestic violence crews at every station, and that's their only job, is to attend jobs like that, investigate it properly, interview neighbours, interview witnesses.
And know the predilection of people who weaponise the law.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that's probably smarter than most of what has been said
But the
here
issue
tonight
is-
already.
The issue is that I spent a month behind bars and I had to pay to get my own legal team to produce a CTV. The police didn't care about it. They did not go to any steps to produce a CTV.
The thing is, if she's made a false statement, she's up for public mischief. I have charged people in the past, women who've alleged rape, with public mischief.
Has that woman been
and
charged,
it's been
Marco? Has that
withdrawn.
woman been charged?
No, they've still continued to charge
And
me.
it was withdrawn by the DPP.
The interview from the police, I watched the interview and her giving a statement. The police practically were coercing her into making up allegations.
Okay,
Then they also bring up to her that, he's a criminal, he has a drug past and he should be off the streets.
Okay, let me bring in someone else from our audience this evening. Her name is Naomi Monfroy. Now, Naomi is the daughter of Shane Hatfield, who was involved in the Qantas baggage handlers' drug crimes. She's also got a degree in criminology, so she's got a pretty good handle on some of the topics that we're talking about here tonight. Naomi, tell us, in terms of your father, in the early days, they were very, very keen to lock him up instantly, but your argument is that they jumped too soon.
My argument is that he was experiencing a mental health crisis at the time of his rearrest. They threw him into custody without any consideration of this, and unfortunately, they didn't think about his mental health and they just threw him back into a prison environment.
Okay, but you're not suggesting he should have walked
No.
based on those
No.
indictable charges?
No way. I'm suggesting that they would have sent him to a rehabilitation centre instead of into a custodial environment. Throwing someone who's already broken into a system that is heavily broken, what result are you expecting to get?
How many years did he end up serving before he committed suicide?
He was originally in prison for 18 years and then he was out on parole for a year and was rearrested and went into prison for about 3 weeks before hanging himself in his cell at Parklea.
Why did he do that?
Because he was mentally unwell and he wasn't given the proper help whilst in a prison environment. Prison officials are not trained to deal with someone having a mental health crisis.
Thank you, Naomi. Fantastic. I want to go to you, Richard. Based on what you've just heard about what goes on inside, are we doing enough to stop them killing themselves?
Well, this is a bigger picture, a bigger question about mental health in the community, and the government decided to get rid of mental health services many years ago, and now the only place to deal with offenders that are suffering from mental health issues is the prison system. I actually did time with Shane. I did about 9 years with him in various prisons, and lovely guy. On paper, he seems like a terrible person involved with importing large commercial quantities of cocaine, but he wasn't. I actually met Naomi as a very young girl. You were probably 10 or 11 years old. I met her in a visit room at prisons at Long Bay. And so Shane shouldn't have been in prison. He shouldn't have been in prison for a baseless allegation of domestic violence. The police turned up. He doesn't drink, he doesn't take drugs. He was having an argument with his girlfriend. They turn up, they know who he is, and handcuffed him and sent him straight to jail. And a month later, he was dead.
Okay, I want to go to John Hadji, if I may. John, if we had specialist groups and spent the $924 million in the way that Tim Priest is suggesting, do you think the evidence presented by police to you and your defendant would be more reliable?
If you've got specialist police working, you usually get more reliable evidence because they know what they're doing. They're targeting a particular thing. Let me just go back quickly to something Richie said, and this is very important. I remember when I was young, the community was full of halfway houses where people with mental issues lived, they were cared for, had their needs met. Those halfway houses are all but gone. The jail system has become the dumping ground for these poor mentally ill people. Prison officers are not, they're not skilled to deal with mentally ill people. The prison system will tell you time and time again that they have the resources to deal with health, mental health, all the rest of it. The fact is nothing beats proper care. The jail system does the best they can with the resources they have and the populations they have. But let's face it, it's not a replacement for somebody genuinely looking after you in a community environment.
Okay, let me go to Tim Priest. Tim, you want something to say on the basis of that?
We've got right away from the point, and the point is that you've got young men, 20 to 30, murdering their partners, and to me it doesn't look like a mental health issue. This looks like an anger issue. It looks like a loss of face issue. You know, there are going to be... Sorry?
Let me get a microphone on Naomi if I can. Let's get a microphone to Naomi. She's got a question she wants to bring in. She's got a criminology degree. I think it's worth getting a question from her.
So if you're saying it's related to anger and a loss of face, isn't that in some way just a symptom of a mental illness?
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a symptom of an ego.
By addressing the ego through therapy, you can then address the mental health issue, right?
No, I don't agree with you. You've got to set your kids boundaries, and you've got to give them parameters by which they behave themselves. And the most important one is you respect the elderly, you respect women, and you respect the disabled. Now, obviously these offenders don't respect women because they wouldn't be harming them. The second
wait a second. Shane didn't harm anybody. There was an accusation made and it was baseless, and he's now dead.
Once again, we've actually digressed.
That's right.
These are isolated incidents. I don't believe this is happening every day where innocent people...
That's a fair call. I want to go to you, Vince.
Yep.
We're talking about the changing face of criminality in terms of domestic violence. We're seeing a younger cohort commit this. They're in that generation where they have been exposed to extreme violence through the internet, something that many of us weren't when we were kids. They're also exposed to easy accessible pornography from about 9 years of age. Extreme pornography, violent pornography, the kind of stuff that, we've never seen before, but from around about, 15 years ago, this is freely seen. Is that playing a part, do you think, in the kinds of violence towards women and the lack of respect to women?
I go back to my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather. Men, my generation and my sons, who are still in their early 30s, are brought up to protect and provide for their family. That's why they successfully find the right partners in life to go on and create a family. If these people in their 20s and up are influenced by garbage on the net, then there's something wrong up here. There's something wrong with the way they've been brought up. There's something wrong with the way they think. And if that's a problem, spend that 900. By the way, that 900 is over 5 years and is spread throughout the whole of Australia.
Correct. Good point.
Come on.
Yeah, come on.
Are we serious?
I need to just add something to what Vinny said, and I think it's very important. The fact is, violence is not bred from one particular factor or component, right? The reality is that violence is often provoked by shame. It's provoked by humiliation, disrespect, ridicule. It changes. Quite often this domestic violence happens in the heat of the moment. People may act in a manner that's out of character for them. So whilst I agree with some of what Vinny says, it's not the whole answer. It's not the whole answer. It's one component of the answer.
Did you have much, Richard, when you were inside, did you have much to do with domestic violence culprits?
Absolutely.
Those who were jailed in there?
Absolutely.
What did you see? You must have observed a particular characteristic.
I think Tim just had a typically blinkered, myopic view of a career cop who's thinking about things from one perspective. But there are arseholes doing horrible things to women right across the board. And the ones that don't have mental illness and are just horrible human beings, and I can think of an example, Dale Barry. He killed a man in a pub fight. I think he served about 12 years. He got out, met a woman, had some kids, and stabbed her 58 times. And I found out about his offence because he asked me to help him facilitate access to his children, one of which he stabbed in the process of stabbing his wife. And this arsehole was the victim. He wanted me to feel sorry for him being in the situation he was in. So, you know, I don't have all the answers, but it's certainly not this view that that Tim's just talked about.
Well, I disagree. Vinny and I saw it. And
Yeah,
we saw it.
I've seen the tail end of it. I've seen the offenders.
But you haven't seen it on a broad scale.
I wasn't saying anything.
Richard, let's give Tim a chance. On the street.
I've seen all the excuses. I've seen the accidental arrests. I've seen people victimised. But fundamentally, at the moment, at this very point in time, with one woman being killed every 4 days, we have to put a fence around it. We have to stop it. And if we're going to injure a few people in that time, it's unfortunate.
There's always going to be collateral damage.
There's always going to be collateral damage. So it's a greater good that we need to come up with now.
Yeah, there's nothing perfect. You're never going to get a perfect system here. But Vince, I want to ask you a question. One quick question about this. Sorry, John wants to say something. Go ahead, John.
Tim, what happens when that collateral damage includes
That's when
the
you
sole
come in. That's when you come in.
And that
That's
gives you
why
a
they got
job.
lawyers like you, John.
That's how you get your money, John. It's that collateral damage.
Yeah, big high-paid lawyer, eh? That's right. They call you.
You've got to keep in mind, quite often, the offender is the only person putting the roof over the head of the family and feeding them. Okay, put a fence around the offender, sure, no problem. But just lock them up willy-nilly. What does the rest of the family do without an income?
That's a very interesting point you just made,
There's
John.
$925 million they're going to give the family, aren't they?
John just made a very interesting point there, Chris.
Come on.
And this goes back to the years ago when we were dealing with the older offender. The wife never worked, often didn't work, and had 4 or 5 kids. And it was the male that earned the money, put the roof over the head, gave them food. She could never leave the bloke, or never kick him out, or never prefer charges. Otherwise, she'd be left destitute. So that offender stayed in the home, bashing that woman day in and day out because she was trapped. In this day and age, with the amount of social security that we have and the opportunities for them to be put up in alternate accommodation, and with Albanese's $925 million, we should be able to do something. But in the meantime, let's stop the carnage.
Okay, I just want to put a postscript on this conversation. I want to go back to Naomi, who's got the microphone. Naomi, your father, you say, committed suicide in the cell. Yeah. There was speculation at the time that he was involved in other crimes or other planning for crime. That speculation led to some suggesting that he was killed inside jail. What do you think happened to him?
I believe that he took his own life. He did hang himself in his cell, but I don't think he was given the appropriate assistance to be turned away from that being his only option.
He wasn't killed inside?
No, I don't believe he was killed
Have
inside.
you seen the post-mortem?
Yes, I have seen the post-mortem report. I do have many questions, and I think there was a negligence on behalf of the prison and prison officials, but yeah, I just don't believe he should have been there in the first place.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I now want to go to crime number 2. The second crime for the week is yet another knife attack. Off the back of what happened from Bondi Junction only 4.5 weeks ago, when we see a knife attack, we think about how we can prevent knife crime. A 10-year-old girl died after being stabbed by her 17-year-old sister in a home in Lake Macquarie in New South Wales. They were the only 2 people in the house at the time when the crime took place. The 17-year-old has now been charged with murder, a domestic violence-related murder, and she is behind bars. It instantly conjures up what we have seen visually, both at Bondi Junction and also at Wakely in Fairfield, when Bishop Emmanuel was stabbed through the eye and also on the shoulder by a 16-year-old individual. I want to go to Richard Buttrose, if I can, to start. Richard, Jack's Law was immediately discussed widely across the nation when these incidents took place. Jack's Law, of course, is something that has been introduced in Queensland, which allows police, without warrant, to go and wand individuals and look for the possession of knives. Is this something every state and territory should adopt?
Look, young Jack Beasley was stabbed and murdered on the Gold Coast at the age of 17, and Queensland introduced a stop and search where they can wand suspects on the street. It's a less invasive way of searching people than patting them down and physically touching them. And it's worked. You know, in the last 12 months, Queensland has disarmed taken 500 weapons off the street. The best New South Wales can do is send a group of police to have a look at how they're rolling out that up in Queensland. I don't know why New South Wales, with the oldest force in the country, needs to have a look at how Queensland's doing things. They just need to introduce the laws.
Come on.
I disagree. I disagree with that.
And Tim Priest?
Look, this is just another piece of equipment that's being added to an already overladen police officer. Capsicum spray, handcuffs, batons, pistols, tasers. Now we're going to give them a wand. If you're going to search someone, you do it with your hands. You don't need a wand. We don't need to go to Queensland. We just keep doing what we're doing.
I don't want to be touched by a cop on the street.
That's bad luck. I mean, you live in a democracy.
But I'm talking about something that's less intrusive.
Move to Queensland and they'll only touch you.
Okay, let's talk to John Hadji on that score, because he will end up representing those who don't want to be touched and don't want to be wand.
Fair dinkum.
And I have many times in the past. Look, it's not an easy answer. The wanding is the most less invasive method of detecting something. It doesn't affect the person being searched, the police officer's not putting himself in any position. If he's got reasonable cause to wand somebody, why not? And if you've got nothing to worry about, why should you not or be worried about?
Well, let me put that to Vince. Vince, in a highly litigious world where everyone goes to court based on being offended or being touched, etc., what are your thoughts on having a wand as opposed to doing what Tim Priest is saying, police searching people?
I'm an old-fashioned cop, okay? And, you know, I love the idea of getting out there and looking at that crowd and seeing who I think, from my experience, warrants a search. And I'll search them. And I'll find out who they are and what they're doing here, because they might be out of place.
This is interesting. The crowd, the audience is laughing, but very often the way in which investigations initiate is based on profiling, right, Tim Priest?
Can I tell you a story?
Exactly. And John, say a drug detecting Labrador, do you find that invasive when they walk through a crowd?
Well, I don't personally find it invasive. I've never been in a crowd where a Labrador's walk through.
Would you find it invasive? Would you? It's not invasive, is it?
It comes down. Some people find it invasive. Some people don't. I mean, look, it comes down to each individual person's perception of what's going on.
The old adage is, if you're not doing anything wrong,
people that are most
you're not
vocal,
worried.
Okay, let me move away from Jack's Law and because I think New South Wales is balking over this. But Tim Priest, let me ask you this question. Are we imagining the fact that we've got a knife epidemic at the moment? Is this an imagination because these have been so high-profile cases?
Well, if you've got no brains and you listen to the Greens, you'd believe that we have no knife problem, because the spokesperson for the Greens produced some stats the other day which I found really curious, and it shows that a particular knife crime has gone down, which is robbery with a knife, not malicious wounding, not attempted murder, which was what we're worried about. But then I flicked through the stats and I found that knife offences, which is different than knife crime. A knife crime is an offence that's been committed with a knife. Knife offence is the police have actually got them before they've done anything wrong. Knife offences, I tell you what, Elon Musk and his rockets be proud of the trajectory, because it's gone from there to there in the space of 4 or 5 years. We have a problem. What we have a problem also is the way they're collecting statistics. They seem to be dividing different crimes into different categories, and we're getting an unfair balance.
But doesn't that tell us a little bit more about the actual crime if it's divided that way?
Well, it'll show one crime will go down. When
You can
say for
manipulate
exa-
statistics, is what Tim's
say,
saying.
say for example, armed robbery used to be robbery with a weapon.
Yeah.
So to be a knife or a gun, you split it in half, and you now make armed robbery a robbery with a firearm, robbery with a knife. They're both going to collapse because you've cut them in half.
All right, so you have seen the statistics, and we're not imagining that this is an epidemic.
Well, we're seeing it every day on TV, Chris.
Okay, let me go to someone who is in our audience right now. Probably the most prolific criminal and police reporter we have in the city of Sydney. And he reports for the Daily Telegraph and has done numerous podcasts and several page spreads on crime and knife crime in particular. I want to bring in Mark Morrie, if I can. Mark is in our audience today. He has written prolifically about the postcode wars. Mark, could you just explain to us what the postcode wars are, for those who don't know, and how prolific is knife crime within that subculture?
It's a terrible thing. Like, the postcode wars basically started in Western Sydney, where you'd have certain young, particularly men or teenage boys, who would have a beef with somebody from another postcode. Now, it started about 10 years ago, but it's now got to the point where young juvenile males are being killed because they've wandered into the wrong postcode.
And it's led to the murder, of course, the well-publicised murder at the Royal Easter Show.
That's
a
exactly
couple of
right.
years
That
ago.
was a 17-year-old boy who was working there, and there were some guys there that said, "Hey, you're from from a different postcode." We ended up seeing it was actually filmed by hundreds of people. We saw that, and he stabbed to death. Now, that is happening, I think 2 weeks ago there was another 17-year-old stabbed to death. Again, it was a postcode war. I know the police now are getting quite worried that there's two aspects to it. Not only is it just young idiots stabbing each other, they're being driven by drill music, or rap music is one thing, which has caused a real problem. The police, because they shut down a band called 1-4, they got so much backlash for being censors. But you've also got some serious crime groups, such as the bikies, such as the Comanchero. Look at these guys and go, these guys are ready to do violence.
So these are
they're
being groomed. They're being groomed, are they?
They're being groomed to take them up to next level. And that's been found. They're almost like a feeder group for some of these guys.
Why knives? Why are knives so prolific?
Because they're so accessible, I believe, I mean,
And easy to hide?
And they are easy to hide, and that's where we come back to stop and search. People's, privacy, people say, I've got a right to privacy, I shouldn't be stopped in the street. Unfortunately, we're seeing people are just getting stabbed, and these young guys particularly, they have these operations on the trains, and on a Saturday night, they'll come back with 60 or 70 knives the cops have found.
It's the weapon of choice, isn't it?
Yeah, so it is. So, and it's the speed, the propensity of them to use them, and the fact that there's no qualms, and the fact to be carrying a knife and then to pull it out and kill, Can
I ask you this question? Do young people get killed because they come from the wrong suburb?
Yes, without doubt. I spoke to some guys in juvenile detention. They were going to be released, and the guys were scared, saying, we're going to release him, he's going to be from St Mary's, and the guys know he's from Doonside. We were going to try and get him back to his suburb safely without him getting killed. There are people being killed because they're from the wrong suburb.
I want to come back to you, Mark, if I may. Vince, I want to talk to you about knife crime. You've heard the statistics from Tim Priest. Have we actually created this because we've been so hard on gun crime?
I think gun crime has been pretty good insofar as we've been able to contain a lot of it. But these people are looking for weapons, and the most accessible weapon, and Mark Morrie's indicated this, is a knife. It's clear. It's so accessible.
Richard,
you can go to the supermarket.
Richard, what do we do? Do we do what Malaysia and Singapore do, that if you are caught with possession only of a knife, it's a 2-year minimum mandatory sentence?
It would make people have a second thought, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
I wouldn't carry a knife if it was 2 years in the slammer.
Yeah. John Hadji, what are your thoughts on having a defendant who was facing a minimum mandatory sentence of 2 years for simply carrying a knife on a train?
Well, of course, deterrents are always a good thing. They'll make some people think twice, but they don't make everybody think twice. That's the problem.
That's the problem.
Knives are easy to get. They're easy to conceal. They're easy to use. You're not on the radar when you buy one or take one out of your kitchen. Go back a little bit further in Sydney's history, where you had all the cutthroat razor gangs. The reason they carried razors was because it was a less penalty than it was carrying a firearm.
That's interesting. I want to go back to Mark Morrie now. Mark, you've spoken also to many victims of these postcode wars. You've spoken to many mothers as well. It's horrendous. And the damage that can be done with a knife is often far more damaging than what could happen if you were shot with a gun.
And we go back to the accessibility of a knife, and they're cheap. You know, to buy an illegal weapon here is pretty expensive in Sydney, and there are plenty of them. But you speak to the mothers and to the victims' families, and they had no idea a lot of the time that their children were out there carrying weapons or were part of a gang. You know, and we're starting, you know, you see it again when you come back to the music. You even see some of these football stars who start making symbols after they score a try, which relates to a postcode. So they're getting idolised, these postcode wars. It's a big problem, and it's just getting worse. As you said, we had that one very, very high-profile murder at Royal Easter Show. But there are knife attacks and postcode wars going on weekly. Weekly, there would be somebody stabbed or confronted with a knife in this city and probably around the country every week.
Tim Priest, how do we tackle it?
Well, this is very much an American. This is very much, each project had their own gang. And if a gang went across the road to the other project, someone got murdered or got shot or stabbed. We've got to stop the debate on how we're going to find these knives and just go ahead and do it. We get hung up on so many things when we want to change. We've got to debate it. We've got to have a conversation around it. We don't want to offend people. We don't want them to feel as though they're being persecuted.
But what's your message to the New South Wales Premier who's played down the idea that New South Wales will adopt Jack's Law?
Forget the wand. Just make your cops keep searching people.
They've got the powers.
They've got the powers and they've got the stats.
Richard, you're shaking your head.
I just don't think, you know, I'm a libertarian at heart, and I just don't think everyone wants to be touched down by a police officer.
Of course you are.
You know, the best civil right you can have, the best civil right you can have in this country is the right to breathe. If you haven't got that right because it's been taken away because some idiot has stabbed you, what life have you got? I would rather err on the side of caution.
Okay, but Tim, how many police officers are going to be inside a court looking at John Hadji across the other side, charged with doing a little bit more than just searching a young woman, for instance?
This is precisely the age that we live in now. We are followed and vilified by every corner of society. You've got internal affairs, you've got the Sydney Morning Herald, you've got the ABC, you've got Instagram. I mean, cops are just under so much scrutiny. No wonder we can't solve gun crime, knife crime and domestics.
Okay, well, let's leave it there. Put pause on that particular subject. We go to crime number 3. Another drive-by shooting in Blacktown in Western Sydney last week. Most likely drug-related, according to what police have said. However, in this case, it seems to be a case of mistaken identity. Now, 2 crimes in a row. When innocent citizens' houses are being targeted, we know that Sydney is becoming the Gotham City for drug users and drug wars. Let's go to our panel on all of this. Let's start with you, John, if I may. Are you getting more defendants knocking on your door asking you to defend them based on drug crime as opposed to other crimes?
Oh, let's face it, drug crime's been up there for quite a number of years now, Chris. It's not a case of it's spiked all of a sudden. There's always been a large amount of drug crime. It's interesting. I mean, drug crime is driven by certain factors. Sometimes those factors are wrapped up and put away by police. Vacuums created. In comes new factors. It's been there for a long time, and unfortunately, I'll see it being there for quite some time yet.
Yeah, Richard, let's talk about you. Let's talk about your experiences. Why are individuals turning to trafficking or moving drugs?
Well, John's talking about factors, and there's one factor, and it's money. And the money is an absolute failure, particularly in New South Wales, of the way the government has approached how they deal with suppliers and how they deal with users. When I was arrested back in 2009, I was facing life in prison. Now, the end user has no consequences. So the life in prison creates money, because to take that risk, it's $250,000 for a kilo in Sydney, it's $20,000 for a kilo in London. The money's there, the money creates the crime. So that creates the supply. On the other side of it, if you're caught with a gram, the consequences are zero.
The money was too much of a lure for you?
Look, there was a lot of factors and money was one of them. And, you know, my arrest was fairly high profile and I had $1.5 million just casually lying on my bed because I didn't know what to do with it. And
as you do.
Yeah,
as you
absolutely. And, you know, one of the guys that supplied...
doesn't everyone?
One of the guys that supplied me was a very large importer. I owed him a small amount of money one day. It was $50,000. You know, I left it in the glove box of my speedboat and forgot about it and found it a few months later. I mean, you know, the money's a massive incentive. And what do you get with the money? This week we've had a high-profile lawyer up in Queensland get arrested for a 120-kilo import. Why would he take that risk? Why would a high-profile, successful lawyer take that risk? And why are people randomly shooting the wrong house? They're shooting the wrong house because of the money. Because
the supply hasn't changed. Now, going to your point about what we do with demand, what we do with those who use. Vince, are we putting the users into a punishable, or are we letting them off too easily?
I don't think the users are doing us any favours because they're creating a market for these people. At the end of the day, we need to somehow, and for me, it's always been a punitive approach to drug control. You know, I don't like the idea that we all of a sudden decriminalise drugs and all of a sudden we find ourselves going from marijuana to cocaine and now fentanyl. 100 times more potent than morphine is being introduced into the environment. Can you imagine how many brains are being fried by these drugs?
It's killing American children at the moment.
It's going to be killing Australians.
And it's about to hit Australia, right?
That's right.
Are we in a position to look after those who fall in that trap, the users I mean, and try and get them off them and try and rehabilitate them?
We need to bump up our intel services as far as the importation of this drug and the manufacturing of this drug within this country. Okay. The users, you're always going to have users. You'll never get away from users.
Okay, let me talk about the ACT approach to this problem, if I may, Tim. It's relax, chill, let's share the drugs, let's certainly not put users in jail. How is that going to play out? And I want to refer you to what's occurred in Oregon, USA. You tell us whether the chill, relaxed approach, the decriminalisation of drugs works.
Well, first of all, we've got to remember that the ACT is basically a banana state. You know, it's no better than some of these failed African states. And these imbeciles down there have brought this legislation in, or this policy in, at the very time that Oregon in the United States, which experimented with this same policy for 3 years, a disaster of epic proportions. We have seen unbelievable human damage. Businesses have moved out of the state of Oregon. It's virtually sent them bankrupt. And Canberra brings it in as Oregon is taking it out.
So Oregon is backing off this whole approach.
They've recriminalised drugs.
They have.
They realise they've made a massive mistake.
So it won't work, will it?
It won't work. And what worries me is that Canberra's on our border. So we're going to have young people travel across, get drugs, shoot up with drugs, and travel back. They're going to be on the roads. This is a recipe for disaster.
Okay, I want to go to one of our audience members. His name is Paul Kenny. He is a criminal defendant, a lawyer, previously spent time as former drug squad detective in New South Wales, and even more in that particular field with the federal agency as well. Paul Kenny, thank you very much for coming onto the program. Tell me, have we lost the war completely when it comes to drugs?
The war has been lost since it started. The situation's quite impossible, in my view. Users, I don't think, should be put in jail. They should be helped as much as possible. But
what does that look like, though? How do we do that?
Well, proper treatment. There's things.
But isn't the best place to have treatment in a jail-like scenario where they can't be distracted?
Not in a jail, in a rehabilitation clinic, something like that, but definitely not in a jail. It's like this mental health situation too. Now mentally ill people are in jail. That's the new treatment centre for mentally ill people, put them in jail. That's an absolute disaster. The mental health system is a total disaster in this country. the way people are treated. To put mentally ill people into jail is just, it's incomprehensible to me. The whole thing needs to be looked at. Legalising drugs is absolute insanity, in my view. I'm 70 years old. I've been going to court now for 51 years. I've never seen anything good come from drugs. But
what would you do tomorrow if you were, say, an Australian federal agent commissioner and you had the power to go to the Prime Minister and suggest what to do about trying to be competitive in this drug war?
Go to the Prime Minister, this Prime Minister. So what I think the Prime Minister should do in relation to all crime and everything like that is come out with us, come out into the streets, go up to the Northern Territory, not go up there and drop in for a couple of hours and go away, go and live there, go and meet the people, talk to the people himself. The Prime Minister to do it. None of this pussyfooting around, all these advisors and people writing speeches for him. Get down and get into the dirt.
But this is our problem, isn't it? In this country, we have career politicians who never really had a job.
Well, they've never had a job.
Yeah, let's go to Tim Priest.
The thing here, Chris, is we've got our jurisdictions a little mixed up. The states look after the drugs internally within the state. The feds are only responsible for the drugs coming into the country. Once they arrive, it becomes a state police problem. So it's a state premier and a state government problem. So it's no good going to Albanese saying we want to do something about drugs. You've got to go to Chris Minns. But then you've got the hurdle of the Greens, you've got the hurdle of the left wing of the Labor Party. And you're going to have this debate around forever about legalising drugs. If you legalise drugs, where are you going to get the cocaine from? Are we going to set up an MOU with the Mexican cartels? Is it going to be like Jim's cocaine supply or something? Or, you know?
Well, how does that look, Richard? How does that look? How does that look if you're legalising drugs? How accessible would it be to get yourself 125 kilos of cocaine?
Easy, very easy. But
easier than it is now?
Well, it's pretty easy now. But, you know, before we have this discussion about whether we should decriminalise, we should enforce the criminality of it. And like I said earlier, you know, the fact that there's a life sentence for a supplier and no punishment for the user, there's a big mismatch here. That I've got a radical view.
Okay.
I thoroughly agree with his point.
Yeah, what's your radical view?
Well, my radical view is, you know, get rid of the life sentence, because for me, spending a decade in jail, I learnt my lesson in the first 15 minutes in custody. I didn't need to stay there for the next 9 years. And this is radical, but, you know, when I got arrested in 2009, a home and away actor, Todd Lasance, got arrested in King's Cross with half a gram of coke. His lawyer went to the courts and said, look, he wants to go to Hollywood, don't give him a conviction, so he didn't. So now what are the consequences?
How did he go into Hollywood, by the way?
Shithouse. And so what are the consequences for users? No one's deterred. My radical view is if the coppers kick in the Wallara Hotel and drag some socialite out who's doing a line of coke, the sentence should be the same as the supplier, and it should be something within the region of, you know.
Vince,
I'll tell you now, Chris, no one's doing cocaine once someone goes to jail for using.
Okay. Vince, I want to ask you this. Yeah. With so many people trying to import and traffic drugs in this country,
yep,
we hear of so many high-profile cases. I get the feeling that those who are caught have probably done it successfully 20 times before.
And that's the problem.
Not in my case.
That's the problem. But, Rose, you know what?
I only did it for the 6 weeks I was under surveillance.
You're lucky I wasn't the judge. Can I say this, Chris? We're only touching about 5% of the containers that come into this country. 5%.
It's 2%. It's 2%.
No, it went up.
It's 2% of 2%.
Well, they told me 5%.
They fucking lied.
They lied, right? Well, let's just say...
It's not many.
Let's just say it's 5%.
It's not many.
Because that's what they told me. I used to remember when it was 1%.
So we need to open every container that comes into the country.
Well, we need better ways of detecting. We need better arms for our intelligence operatives to be able to work and get the intel through these other sources. Now, we all know where it comes from.
We need a Coast Guard.
Comes from Colombia.
We need a Coast Guard, Chris.
Coast Guard.
We don't need a border force. We need a Coast Guard.
Well, we've got Coast Guards to look after asylum seekers, but no Coast Guards to look after drug movers.
Richard's right about punishing the user. Michael Barnes, who's the current head of the Crime Commission, was a coroner, and before that was a lawyer. Very measured man. He did an interview, and a rare interview at that, a few weeks back, and he blamed the middle class, red wine sipping,
glamorising this crap.
stockbrokers from the CBD for fueling this cocaine epidemic and fueling the drive-by shootings. So, and I thoroughly agree. I think we have to attack, and we used to in our day, we would lock up the user. You know, one of the favourite offences was use and possess. So you get them for two offences.
Yeah.
And they would get a fine and they get a criminal record.
And normally a trifecta went with that as well.
Well, sometimes there was assault, police and resist arrest, which turned into a quadrella.
Thank God I didn't cross paths with these guys.
But you would not often see the same offender come back because he knows that he's going to get charged again, he's going to have to go to court. It had a degree of deterrence. For your hardcore drug addict, you'll never deter him. All right, they'll just keep going. The only place for him is, like Paul said, a rehabilitation centre that is enclosed. They can't get out. So it's no good having a rehabilitation centre where they can just walk in and out. You've got to lock them up. Like they did in Sweden. They actually imposed jail-like conditions, but it wasn't a jail. Okay. They actually got treatment.
Okay, got treatment. John Hadji, you'd be behind that, wouldn't you? You'd be supportive of that, wouldn't you?
Of course, of course. I mean, treatment starts at the bottom level. The bottom level is the user. If we can treat the users, there'll be less suppliers. I mean, that's how it works in theory.
Are we up to, and do we have the nous to put in place treatment places
Well,
for
we
drug
just need
use?
another $925 million. Like
But
they
not
promised.
over 5 years, Tim.
No.
Yeah, right.
Look, Chris, I think these guys have got a very harsh one-dimensional view, and they're talking about people that use drugs as dead shit, no hopers, right? But the
Not
reality,
all of them, but
the reality is we're talking about stockbrokers and high-functioning people, and the statistics show that most of the country has taken some sort of drug at one point in their life, which is probably why the government's trying to placate the end user, because there's so many numbers there, which is why there's no consequence for the user.
Okay, I want to sum up what we've attacked today. And we've done a great job of attacking the solutions. We've done a great job of attacking why we've got the problems when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to knife crime, and when it comes to drugs. We are in a different world, Vince. How do we tackle this in general? How do we tackle the idea that crooks are getting younger, that crimes are getting more gruesome, that the proliferation of the crime is increasing? How do we go about tackling all of that?
Why don't we go back to where we were? Because that's what's happening right now, Chris. The education system had realised that discipline in the schools no longer exists. Now they're starting to say, let's reintroduce discipline in the schools. Can I say this? Why don't we go back to being families? Why don't we go back to loving and caring for each other? Why don't we have the police being respected in the community and doing the job they're supposed to do?
Okay, Richard, your thoughts?
Well, the solution, you know, with my background, to say that I think things should be harsher and people should be wandered down, you know, for knife crime and stopped and searched by the police, doesn't seem to be received too well here for saying it's intrusive. But, you know, that's one measure, and consequences for users.
Tim, what about schools? Vince makes a very, very good point. It's a different place to the school that you and I went to.
You know what, Chris? The skilled teachers have only got themselves to blame. I saw it at Cabramatta, the complete reluctance by principals to acknowledge they had gang problems in schools because they were worried about the reputation damage to their school. Not about the students and what they could do inside, but about their school. So over the years, school teachers have, you know, proffered this woke nonsense. They're teaching us to hate our history. They, this gender fluidity and gender, they have upended society, and they wonder why there is no longer any respect.
ABC, writing, reading, spelling.
John
normal.
Hadji, what have we done to our society where we've got to the proliferation of so much crime and so many criminals?
Well, let's face it. Firstly, the media is much more prolific than it used to be. So we're hearing of more. We're getting more. It's not that a lot of crime didn't exist before. It's just that we're hearing about it. We're hearing it in real time. We're talking about it today. It's always been there. It's growing. I would imagine, at the same rate as the population grows. There's always a certain component of the population that will always work in crime. The things Vinny say about respect and all the rest of it, I can't argue with one single breath of what he said. But it's not so simple. There's a lot more complex components and factors involved.
Exactly.
That's what we look at. We need to look at, is the war on drugs worth doing? Do we look at the type of drugs we're fighting? Do we do things like split cannabis away from the other harmful drugs? These are questions that need to be answered by people who know more about this stuff than I do, of course.
I agree with
But
John. The type of drugs is very important.
All right, let's leave it there. John Hadji, I appreciate your time with our panel this evening. Thank you very much. Vince Caribs, thank you very much for your input.
Thank you, Chris.
Richard Buttrose, great to have you on. And Tim Priest, thank you very much for your involvement as well. This has been Cop to Cop. It is true crime in real time. I hope you have enjoyed what we've fleshed out, what we've unpacked, the whys and the wherefores. If you'd like to be part of our audience, you can write into us here at Cop2Cop. You've got, no doubt, so many things to say yourself. Please send emails. You can go to the website and do that as well, and we'll include that in our future episodes. We'll see you next week right here. My name is Chris Smith. This is Cop2Cop.